So we are going to start a series tonight on the book of Numbers. So I want to start, as we so often do at the beginning of a new series that we're doing, and just kind of do a general knowledge dump. What do we know about the book of Numbers? I'm just going to throw it open to everybody, and whatever you know, shout it out.
Not much. I heard, I thought it was a book, had a lot of laws, a lot of Jewish laws in it, but maybe I'm even wrong on that.
Okay. It's probably not a bad guess, given that it is part of the Torah, part of the Pentateuch. There's a pretty good chance you're going to see some laws and regulations in there, and we do get plenty of that stuff in there. What else do we know about the book of Numbers?
Nothing.
Okay. Carol, you have anything you want to toss out there?
Well, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I guess I'm under the impression Moses, in fact, did not write this book.
Okay. So yes, it is often referred to as the fourth book of Moses, following the tradition that Moses wrote the first 5 books of Scripture, which even since antiquity, a lot of people have had second thoughts about for a variety of reasons. More than likely, Moses did not write this book. I was looking at my handout this morning. Somebody mentioned that this morning. I don't actually think I talked too much about authorship in here. So let me just briefly throw out there, like most of the rest of those first 5 books of Moses, or first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, it is, I think, generally assumed it came into the form we have it now around the time of the Babylonian exile, as the people were separated from the land, separated from all the things that kind of reminded them of these stories of God and his people. And people said, we better compile this. We better write this down. We don't know when we're going to get back home again. And there does seem to be a little bit of that composite source going on, like you had for that you see particularly in Genesis, those multiple sources, because we do have a couple different types of material. So it seems those may have come from a couple different authors, and then were finally compiled into a single book. But yeah, the traditional view was that this was one of the books that Moses wrote. However, for a long, long time, people have had their doubts that Moses did, in fact, write these books. Anything else we know about the book of Numbers? And if not, that's okay, because as I say often, we are here to learn. Okay. The other nice thing is that we're perhaps not coming with not really any preconceived notions of what we're diving into. And then it takes a little bit of the pressure off for me, because anything we learn about it is an improvement from where we've started. So this is great. So like we said earlier, this is the, let me ask first, does everybody have access, either a printed copy or pulling up on a device, access to our handout?
Yes.
Very good. And everyone has a Bible?
Yep.
Yep.
Very good. All right. So it is the 4th book of Moses, or 4th book of the Pentateuch. In Hebrew, the book is called Bimidbar, which means in the wilderness, because the first words of the book in Hebrew are in the wilderness. Interestingly enough, in English, it is the only one of those first 5 books that has a title that has been translated out of the Greek titles that were given to these books. So Genesis is roughly translated from Greek, the origin. Exodus, the way out. Leviticus, stuff related to the Levites. Deuteronomy, the 2nd edition of the law. Numbers is a perfectly good English word. And if they followed the same pattern that they used for the other books, it would be called arithmoi. which is Greek for numbers. I don't know why that is the case, but there it is. The book is given the title Numbers because there are two parts of the book where there is a great census of the people taken during the course of their travels. The first one happens in chapters 1 through 4, and the second census happens closer to the end of the book in chapter 26. Perhaps the easiest way to understand how Numbers fits in with what's going on with the rest of the Pentateuch is that is pretty much Exodus part 2. The story begins in Exodus. You have the oppression of the Israelites. You have the birth and call of Moses. You have the deliverance of God's people. And then you have the covenant at Sinai. So the people move from Egypt to Sinai, and there they stay for, a third of the book of Exodus and the entire book of Leviticus. So if we remember when we studied Leviticus, it is a series of laws and regulations of how the people can interact with God in a faithful way. The story, the narrative that gets the people from Egypt to the promised land resumes in Numbers. So the people begin the story at Mount Sinai, where they've been for quite some time, and then they depart and they move out, and we get some story that moves them eventually by the end of the book to the east side of the Jordan River, and that sets us up for Deuteronomy, where Moses gives his kind of
Rose up, Pastor.
We
can hear you
lost
again.
again. You froze up.
I did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Tom, will you share with us, please, Numbers 11, 1 through 3?
Now when the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, the Lord heard it, and his anger was kindled. Then the fire of the Lord burned against them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. But the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire abated. So that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned against them.
So how would we summarize those couple of verses if we just had to do it in a couple words? What's the sequence of things that happens?
The people complained, and God lit their camp on fire. And Moses,
And then what?
Moses prayed, and the fire, and God put the fire out, or abated the fire.
So the people kind of get a bad attitude toward God. They start to get a little rebellious. They complain. They they complained in the presence of the Lord about their misfortunes. They grumbled. They did not remember what God has done for them in getting them out of Egypt. They turned their back on God. God responds in anger, and Moses intercedes for the people, and God says, okay, I will stop, and I will not leave these people out in the wilderness. So you have your rebellious people, your angry but forgiving God, and Moses as the intermediary. Moses is the one who works between those two. And that theme pops up regularly throughout this book of Numbers. A second theme or second motif that we see often pops up in chapter 21. Carol, would you share with us, please, Numbers 21, verses 21 through 24?
Yes. Then Israel sent messengers to King Shihad of the Amorites, saying, "Let me pass through your land. We will not turn aside into field or vineyard. We will not drink the water or of any well. We will go by the king's highway until we have passed through your territory." But Shihan would not allow Israel to pass through his territory. Shihan gathered all his people together and went out against Israel to the wilderness. He came to Jahaz and fought against Israel. Israel put him to the sword and took possession of his land from the Aran to the Jabbok, as far as the Amorites, for the boundary of the Amorites was strong.
So again, if you had to summarize that, how would you summarize that series of things that happened? What are the Israelites trying to do here?
Go through somebody else's territory.
Right, they're trying to pass through. They're trying to get to the promised land. And they really go out of their way. We are not going to stomp all over your fields. We're not going to drain your wells. We're not going to take your livestock. We're going to stay on the main road and just walk on through. But a ruler refuses to let them through. With God's help, they are able to defeat this ruler so they can continue to go in the direction that God needs them to go. So that idea, a ruler refuses Israel passage. With God's help, Israel is able to defeat these people and continue on their journey. So that happens a few times in the book of Numbers as well. I just want to mention, somebody had asked about it this morning. This is taking place, kind of southeast of the Dead Sea. So the people have left Egypt, gone kind of to the southern end of the Sinai Peninsula to Mount Sinai, and then worked their way kind of east-northeast. And the Ammonites live in the area that is roughly now Amman, Jordan. So the Ammonites is where we get the name Amman for the city. So if you're roughly familiar with some of the geography over there, this is taking place kind of southeast of the Dead Sea. So these two themes, these two motifs happen repeatedly throughout the book. And it's kind of an interesting pairing of themes, and this idea that the people are rebellious and Moses has to intercede for them, and yet God is going to keep that promise that these people are going to make it to the promised land. God is going to take action to get them where they need to go. Numbers is not an uninterrupted story the whole way through the book. It makes it a little challenging to study, makes it a little challenging to present. So Genesis it's a series of stories, and you can tell how they build off each other. The first part of Exodus is a story straight through, and then it gets into the law and teaching material. And even Leviticus, the whole thing from start to finish is instructional material. It's just kind of, here are the rules for how you approach God faithfully. Numbers consists of a couple different types of content. And those three primary types of content that we see are narrative. There are stories. There's definitely stuff we hear where, yep, this is a story. There's, people who take action and circumstances around them. So there are chunks of narrative interspersed throughout the book. That is mixed in with legal teaching or instruction. So some of the things that we saw a lot in Leviticus, we see some of that in Numbers as well. Numbers also has some sections of poetic material. So we have narrative, we have legal or instructional, and we have poetic. The poetic material is likely the oldest part of the book chronologically. Poetry tends to be passed down more easily because it's metrical. Sometimes it's easier to remember the words to a song, or we make a mnemonic device that rhymes or something. So poetry often has a very long lifespan. So the poetic parts of Numbers, it's not a huge amount of the book, but probably is the most ancient part of the book. And interestingly, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I noticed right after the section we just read, it says something about the ballad of that king, or from the, of when they had the battle there in later on in chapter 21. I think it's 27 through 30.
Yep. Therefore, the ballad singers say, yes, exactly. So that is one of those poetic sections. Absolutely. So, and we're going to be looking at, a little bit of each type of that material. I don't remember if we're going to be looking at this specific one, but there's an example right there on the page with us. So in addition to having kind of three primary types of content, the book of Numbers takes place in three primary locations, and each of these locations is pretty symbolic. The first is at the foot of Mount Sinai, and they are there for about 10 days. Now, of course, they have already been there for quite some time, but when the book of Numbers starts, from the beginning of the book to when they head out, they're there for about 10 days. So what would Mount Sinai be symbolic of? What is significant about that as a setting for this part of the story of God and his people?
10 Commandments.
Which are part of the I tell all my confirmation students.
The covenant with people.
Yes, the covenant. I tell the confirmation students that if I'm teaching and they don't know what the answer is, just say covenant or God's promises, and they're probably going to be pretty close. If Corlin is teaching, the right answer is almost always grace. So, they have their fallback positions there. But yeah, so Sinai is very symbolic of the covenant. It is a direct reminder of, this is the first stop when we got out of Egypt. We really freshly remembered what God had done in the Exodus, which is why we as a people entered into this covenant, because God had already done this for us. So they start, again, deeply rooted in covenant and in Exodus. They're there for about 10 days. Then they move out into the wilderness that is south and east of the promised land. So they are in the wilderness, and they are out in the wilderness for about 38 years. So the vast majority of the time, if we say the Exodus lasted 40 years, the vast majority of that time is covered here in the book of Numbers. What is the significance of the wilderness? When we think of wilderness in scriptural terms, what is its significance?
What came to mind for me was kind of like testing the people and their faith, or getting them together to believe in God, and
all those things put together, I would use the word formation. God is forming them into his own people. One of the things that I think is important about Exodus in particular, but kind of these whole first 5 books all together, it's kind of like God took the people out of Egypt in a day, got them across the Red Sea, but now it takes 40 years to get Egypt out of the people, to kind of reform them as God's own people, reform them as free people. But all of those things play into it. It's a place of formation. It's a place of testing. It is that place of rebellion and forgiveness. The people are learning to trust God. They've been living in slavery. Trust is maybe not a quality that they have really had the chance to develop. Out in the wilderness, they are learning to trust God, and it is not, it's not a perfectly smooth transition. So there's that rebellion and forgiveness, but yeah, that idea of formation. God kind of reforms the people after the exile. They come through the wilderness back into the promised land. Jesus is out in the wilderness, proving himself out there. So yeah, wilderness is really important in biblical thought. And I think when we get to our second handout, I actually have some travel log pictures of this exact wilderness, where some of these things in Numbers took place. And when they say wilderness, there's big stretches where there is not a thing out there. Believe you me. So we will actually see pictures. So the second, they have the wilderness is the second of those locations. The third location is the frontier east of the promised land. It is that east bank of the Jordan River. They are there for about 5 months. What might be the kind of symbolic importance of that third setting, of that frontier, the eastern edge of the promised land?
They're on the verge of reaching their destination.
Yeah, definitely. It's that place. They are ready to enter the land after the whole experience of the Exodus. They're kind of ready to close that chapter of their story with God and begin the next chapter. And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of break it up by setting. So we're going to study some of what goes on at the foot of Mount Sinai. We're going to look at some of the narrative, some of the teaching, instruction, legal material, and some of the poetic material. And then we'll move on to the wilderness. Then we'll move on to that frontier on the eastern part of the promised land. Let me stop there and ask questions, comments, concerns, insights, other things people want to throw out there for the greater good.
I'd like to know your thoughts on why it took so darn long to get to the promised land. I mean, I guess I've heard before that it was actually an 11-day journey if they had done it a straight shot.
Yeah, we are actually going to be looking at that in a little more detail when we get to the wilderness section. We'll be looking at that in some more detail. So if you can hold that question, we are going to get to it.
Great.
So we're going to spend some time with that. Although it makes me think of the cartoon someone sent me. It said something like, after 39 and a half years in the wilderness, Mrs. Moses finally stopped and asked for directions. So there's a variety of thoughts on that. But yeah, the book of Numbers is also really interested in that question. And they do speak to that, and we will get to that, but just not tonight. Other questions? Okay. Well, let us turn to our text. Renee, would you share with us, please, Numbers chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and then verses 17 through 19?
Lord spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting in the desert of Sinai on the first day of the second month, second year, after the Israelites came out of Egypt. He said, take a census of the whole Israelite community by their clans and families, listing every man by name, one by one. You and Aaron are to count according to their divisions all the men in Israel who are 20 years old or more and able to serve in the army. One man from each tribe, each of them, the head of his family, is to help you. For the names of the men who are to assist you.
Okay. And yeah, if you jump down to 17, 18, and 19, if you could pull your microphone closer to you, or if you could move closer to your microphone, that would be tremendous.
Okay.
There we go.
Moses and Aaron took these men whose names had been specified, and they called the whole community together on the first day of the second month. The people registered their ancestry. And then 20 years or more were listed by name, one by one. The Lord commanded Moses, so he counted them in the desert of Sinai.
So, I mean, what is what kind of material do we have here? What is going on here?
Census taking.
Yeah, they're taking a census. So the action that kind of sets the book in motion is they're tallying up the numbers again, hence the book of Numbers. And this is not because they are trying to do a demographic study. This is not because they're trying to apportion resources. Verse 3, we are trying to figure out how many people we have who can fight. Because on this journey, there may be the possibility we need to fight our way through some places. We want to know where we stand. So that becomes a stickier wicket later in the Hebrew Bible as kings go ahead and take censuses or censi. They take more than one census. How about that?
Works.
And they take these censuses, and God is not okay with that because God says they are going to try to rely on their own military prowess rather than trusting me to take care of it. But that is not the issue here. But it's very clear here. They are being counted to see who is eligible to fight. In my research for this, one scholar said if you added all the numbers up, it would total 603,505 men. Divided by the 22,273 firstborn sons, that means that each family had 27 sons. While it's certainly possible that a family would have 27 sons, I don't think that is highly likely. However, these numbers that indicate families are just enormous. This is probably meant to confirm that God is keeping that promise that Abraham's descendants are going to be fruitful and multiply. So these huge census numbers, there was probably a theological reason for it, and that is God keeps promises. So right there is where my default answer for our confirmation kids would be exactly the right answer. Why do they have so many kids? Covenant, God's promises.
Were multiple wives allowed during this time, or was that done? Because that would then help explain why so many.
Well, certainly we know that was going on in the time of the patriarchs, many generations before this, and we know it went on during the time of the monarchy. So I would assume that, yeah, there was probably some of that going on. So yeah, that's certainly possible. for those of us who have, 2 or 3 children, the thought of 27 probably is outright terrifying. So
Not only that, more than several wives. That'd be even worse.
Moving right along.
I'm not taking the bait. Yes, needless to say, the family structures were likely significantly different than we often imagine them. This was not mom, dad, 2.5 kids, and a dog. So, but anyway, again, the key thing, the numbers are telling us that God is keeping this promise. So in spite of being enslaved in Egypt, in spite of being out in the wilderness, these people are still on their way to becoming as numerous as the sands on the seashore because God said so. So interestingly enough, we've taken this census, and then it gets a little more specific. I will share with you now Numbers 1:48 through 54. The Lord said to Moses, "Only the tribe of Levi you shall not enroll, and you shall not take a census of them with the other Israelites. Rather, you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the covenant and over all its equipment and over all that belongs to it. They are to carry the tabernacle and all its equipment, and they shall tend it and shall camp around the tabernacle. When the tabernacle is set out, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And any outsider who comes near shall be put to death. The other Israelites shall camp in their respective regimental camps by companies, but the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the covenant, that there may be no wrath on the congregation of the Israelites, and the Levites shall perform the guard duty of the tabernacle of the covenant." The Israelites did so. They did just as the Lord commanded Moses. So we start to see something that I think will probably become more significant whenever we get to the book of Deuteronomy. But the Levites here are set apart to do specific things. What is the special instruction? How would you sum up what is their job? What is their function?
Keepers of the tabernacle.
Right. So they are the people who tend to the many aspects of the worship life of the community. The priests handle the sacrifices, and the priests handle certain parts of the acts of worship, but the Levites are responsible for making sure everything is in good order. And they are doing guard duty, because remember, if there's one thing we learn from Leviticus, it's that you approach God on God's terms. And if God says there are particular people who can come in here and other people cannot, God is not playing around. God is really serious about that. So the Levites are there to help keep that boundary there.
This tabernacle is actually the Ark of the Covenant, is it not? As in Raiders of the Lost Ark?
The Ark of the Covenant is in the tabernacle. The tabernacle is kind of a really ornate mobile structure that the Ark of the Covenant stays in.
Okay.
But yes, they are related to each other. The interesting thing here is that verse 49, "Only the tribe of Levi you shall not enroll." You are not counting them as a part of your number of people who are eligible to fight. The Levites are not going to be part of the army. And so it's interesting, there's a kind of a parallel situation in Israel today where people who are enrolled at specific seminaries are exempt from military service, and they have universal conscription. So you have the vast majority of people who are going to serve in the military, whether they want to or not. but then you have a specific set of people who are preparing to take on religious duties who are exempted. And as with so many other things, some people say this is great. We have a group of people who can just devote their whole lives to studying Torah. You have other people who say, not so fast. How come the rest of us are expected to put our necks on the line and these folks aren't? But even in this early period, in Numbers, you have a group that is set apart, and their duties are so important. They are set apart, they are holy, and there is the instruction that they will not be a part of the people that goes out and fights. So the Levites have some unique things going on even before they get into the Promised Land. There is some more narrative material in chapter 2, and having read a chunk of chapter 2, I thought it would make more sense for me simply to summarize that for you. If you would like to read it for yourselves, I wholeheartedly encourage you to do that after we have wrapped up our time together. But in chapter 2, they talk about setting up the camp, and this is in a sense like the show MASH. The M is for mobile. It's a big operation, but it is picked up and moved regularly. So there are specific instructions for how that camp is arranged. There is the tent there, the tabernacle. That is the holiest part of the camp. The east side of it is reserved for the priests. So for some reason, the east side is the holy side of it. Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun get to be close to the priests, and the rest of the tribes are kind of fanned out around that. So there is kind of a, even the way they set up their camp is done in a way that honors God. And there's this, this is the instruction, or this is the narrative of how they put that camp together. Let me stop there. So we have, some narrative action here. We have people going out and taking the census. We have people setting up camp. Let me stop there. Questions?
So, so this is within just a few years after they have left Egypt. So, like Joseph's sons, they're still there, right? The Reuben and all these are actually the sons of Joseph who are still part of the action here, correct?
No. There is a period of about 400 years between the end of Genesis and the beginning of Exodus.
Okay. All right. I got you. I just miscalculated. Sorry.
Right.
I keep on saying these are the tribes that descended then. Okay.
Right. These are the tribes. So the tribal affiliation continues to be really important. Again, particularly the Levites have some unique things going on. And as we're going to see, even among each tribe, in each tribe, there are particular clans. There's, kind of smaller family units within each tribe. And there are certain clans or certain family units that are set apart for other things. So yeah, we see all those names because the tribe that you were a part of is still pretty significant to these people.
Yeah, that was my bad. I had a brain cramp because obviously they were in Egypt for many years, and all of those people were long dead.
Right. But the family structure is really important in this culture. So while the people have died, who they were still matters. So in this first part of the book of Numbers, we do get quite a bit of legal content. We get quite a bit of instruction. Excuse me. And I want to do similar to what we did when we looked at Leviticus, do kind of an overview, just kind of show you this is the type of stuff that is in here without looking at every single instance of it. So, Tom, would you share with us, please, Numbers 3, verses 5 through 10?
Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, bring the tribe of Levi near and set them before Aaron the priest, so that they may assist him. They shall perform duties for him and for the whole congregation in front of the tent of meeting, doing service at the tabernacle. They shall be in charge of all the furnishings of the tent of the meeting and attend to the duties for the Israelites as they do service at the tabernacle. You shall give the Levites to Aaron and his descendants. They are unreservedly given to him from among the Israelites. But you shall make a register of Aaron and his descendants. It is they who shall attend to the priesthood, and any outsider who comes near shall be put to death.
So the instruction here. So summarize that for me.
Well, obviously everything goes through Moses, as has pretty much always been the case. And they have these duties, but I don't really understand is that they're talking about a congregation. So is it like a mini church for worshiping the tabernacle, or is that what they're talking about here?
So to the best of my knowledge, when they use the term congregation in this context, they're talking about the whole people of Israel. So God's people is the congregation. So when they say they shall perform duties for him and for the whole congregation in front of the tent of meeting, they are doing some of the work of worship for the whole people of Israel. So we have, again, a particular tribe is turned over to Aaron, and God says Aaron is in charge of these people, and Aaron's descendants are in charge of these people. They are going to care for the tabernacle. They are going to work alongside the priests in tending to that part of the people's life. And I mentioned a moment ago that we find out there are particular clans or parts of the tribe that then are kind of branched off for other things. We see that here in verse 10. You will make a register of Aaron and his descendants. It is they who shall attend to the priesthood. Any outsider who comes near shall be put to death. So, and I had to look this up earlier. The beginning of the book of Exodus, it says a Levite man married a Levite woman, and she had a son. They called him Moses. Aaron is Moses's brother, so Aaron is a Levite already. So he's already in the group that is set apart. But then his descendants will be the priests. They are the ones who do the holiest work. They are the ones who are allowed, again, according to the teaching God gives them, they are the ones who are allowed to approach God in the most intimate ways that God is allowing for the people. So the tribal affiliation is important, and then within that, which clan or which subgroup of the tribe also matters. So we have specific instructions on the Levites. We have specific instructions on Aaron and his descendants. We now know which group of people is going to tend to the worship and spiritual life of the people.
Is the reason for an outsider who has the misfortune of stumbling upon where they're at, are they put to death because they are not allowed to see the religious service, or because they're not allowed to be near the tabernacle?
I think it's more that they're not allowed to be near the tabernacle. Because again, Exodus, Leviticus, there's really specific things spelled out in terms of this is how you prepare to be in God's presence in that way. And if you wander into God's presence and you are not prepared for it, you are not ready for it, that is bad news. You are not honoring God.
But that
and
would
when
be,
you are,
but that would be an outsider, meaning like just a native, not one of the escape, or not one of the Israelites. I mean, or
no,
or
I think that's the Israelites. It's anybody who's not one of the priests.
oh,
If they
okay,
happen to go
okay,
into a place that is reserved for the priests, that's not okay.
okay. I thought it was an outsider, an Amorite or something who happened to
Right.
stumble. Okay,
Well, and part of it is the thought that the Israelites should know better. God has given this and God has given them this instruction, so they should know better. But yeah, I think that is anyone outside of the priestly descendants of Aaron, Israelite or not. So we need to get a little bit of context for this next bit of teaching here. Carol, will you share with us, please, Exodus 13, verses 1 and 2?
Then the Lord said to Moses, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving.
Hold on a minute, Carol. You got to turn to the book of Exodus, because the teaching here doesn't make sense unless we know what God has already said.
Okay. Trying to give you advanced previews here, but okay. Now let's try it again.
I mean, it's God's word. It's all good stuff, but it'll
Yes.
make less sense. That's all.
Okay. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever is the first to open the womb among the Israelites of human beings and animals is mine.
So every single firstborn is dedicated to God. So whether that is your cow gives birth for the first time, your goat gives birth for the first time, one of your wives gives birth for the first time, that firstborn is specially set apart for God. That might mean, if it's an animal, that it is sacrificed. If it is a child, they are set apart for God, and it might mean that they are required to serve God in the tabernacle. It is required that they are to serve God in a particular special kind of way. So the firstborn, consecrated, set apart to God. The firstborn is mine, God says. So all of us younger siblings, I mean, well, thanks a lot, God. I guess we know where we stand. However, when we get into the book of Numbers, we get kind of an expansion on that teaching. Renee, would you share with us, please, Numbers chapter 3, verses 40 through 51. And if you could just make sure you're close to the microphone there.
Mute me first. Okay. The Lord said to Moses, count all the firstborn Israelite males who are a month old or more, and make a list of their names. Take the Levites for me in place of all the firstborn of the Israelites, and the livestock of the Levites in place of all the firstborn of the livestock of the Israelites. I am the Lord. So Moses counted all the firstborn of the Israelites as the Lord commanded him. Total number of firstborn males a month old or more listed by name was 22,273. The Lord also said to Moses, take the Levites in place of all the firstborn of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites in place of their livestock. The Levites are to be mine. I am the Lord. To redeem the 273 firstborn Israelites, to exceed the number of the Levites, collect 5 shekels for each one, according to the sanctuary shekel, which weighs 20 gerahs. Give the money for the redemption of the additional Israelites to Aaron and his sons. So Moses collected the redemption money from those who exceeded the number redeemed by the Levites. From the firstborn of the Israelites, he collected silver weighing 1,365 shekels, according to the sanctuary shekel. Moses gave the redemption money to Aaron and his sons, as he was commanded by the word of the Lord.
So what is going on here?
Oh.
Another census.
Right? So we have a very specific census of the Levites here. But why does God tell Moses to take this particular census? What is the point of knowing how many Levites there are? Particularly in light of that commandment out of Exodus. Exodus says every firstborn is going to be specially set aside for me. But now, what does God say here in Numbers?
Going to take money, shekels.
For some, but for most of them, what is God going to take in place of the firstborn of all the Israelites? You shall accept the Levites for me. I am the Lord, as substitutes for all the firstborn among the Israelites, and the livestock of the Levites as the substitute for the firstborn among the livestock of the Israelites. So this requirement that there are a certain number of people who are set apart for God's purposes, it now shifts. God says, I'm willing to take a substitute. Every firstborn does not need to be dedicated to my service. We will take all of the Levites. They will be dedicated to my service. So, in the Bible I have here, it says the redemption of the firstborn. It's kind of the letting go of the firstborn. God says, I will take a substitute. This is what you really do owe me, but I know that is probably beyond you. I am willing to accept someone else in your place. Does that general idea sound at all familiar to anybody?
Well, it's redemption. You could almost say it's redemption for one sin.
Say more. I like where you're going with it.
Well, I mean,
So
you could take it all the way through Jesus's redemption for us, right? I mean, there'd be a parallel.
Yeah. There is a school of thought, and the theologian's term is substitutionary atonement. There's a school of thought that says, there needs to be a price paid for sin. People cannot just be this rotten in God's sight and get away with it. But there is nothing we can offer that would actually make up for that. In God's mercy, God says, I will accept a substitute. In fact, I will give you the substitute whose suffering and death will atone for you. I am willing to accept a substitute. And so I just find that a fascinating parallel. Obviously, Jewish scholars would probably read it differently. A lot of Christians would read it differently. I myself have there's some reasons why some of the atonement stuff does not sit exactly right with me, but I think it's interesting that we do see this idea here, that this is an act of redemption, that God is willing to accept a substitute in order to fulfill God's command. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
So what did that mean before this when the firstborn had to be, I mean, what did that mean? The person had no life, or he wasn't put to death, obviously, right?
Right.
Firstborn?
Yes, the Israelites do not do human sacrifice. That is, they do not do that. That is one of the reasons why
But
the
then
story of
what did it mean? That person is unable to have a life, unable to marry himself? I mean, what did it mean for that person?
as best I can tell, it would have meant they were under a vow of some sort for a particular style of life. There were people called the Nazarites, and they were under a vow, and that was usually for a year or something like that. And they had very strict regulations on their behavior. And so it may have been that the firstborn initially was supposed to be, all of the firstborn were going to be Nazarites. All of the firstborn were going to be doing the sorts of things that the Levites and the priests do. However, in Numbers, so you can see at a certain level, that is going to cause a lot of hardship among the people. And perhaps in God's mercy, God says, we're going to take just the Levites. That is why they are there. They are set apart wholly for this purpose. So I think it would have been something along the lines of the firstborn would have been under a vow to, serve God in a very specific way. The firstborn of the animals, those probably would have gotten sacrificed. But the Israelites did not do human sacrifice, and they were loud and proud about that, particularly when looking around at some of the really abominable stuff that some of their neighbors did. They said, we don't do human sacrifice, and we are proud of it. And I would say, and with good reason. But that is my sense of it. Does that somewhat start to kind of answer your question?
Yeah, that they may have had like no life for at least a period of time before they were allowed to loosen things up. Would that be fair to say?
Right.
Or were they perpetually stuck in this mode until they died? I guess that's.
That I don't know, and I don't think we have to my knowledge, there's not a lot of other material on it, because remember, that instruction was given in Exodus as a part of the teaching that is handed down at Sinai, and the people are still at the foot of Mount Sinai when this teaching is given. So the initial commandment, kind of the provisional commandment was only in place for, maybe a period of months up to a year, maybe. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity for that to really come into effect. But now this kind of revised or amended commandment, or a fuller revelation of what God wants. Let's go with that. I like that a lot better. This fuller revelation of God's teaching, that was in force much, much longer. So I don't know that they got around to outlining, all of the firstborn are going to do X, Y, and Z. There's a lot more information on this is what the Levites are going to do. And even among the Levites, there are particular people who are going to do this or that. So I do not know what the firstborn would have done, but my suspicion is that it was not outlined in great detail because that commandment was not, was kind of changed in light of this fuller revelation of what God wanted.
Okay, I mean, it is kind of safe to say, though, that it must have been somewhat onerous, because otherwise there wouldn't have been this redemption where, to have any meaning or value.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. Exactly. So we get a little more teaching material here. I guess that comes back to me out of Numbers 4, verses 1 through 4. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, "Take a census of the Kohathites, separate from the other Levites, by their clans and their ancestral houses, from 30 years old up to 50 years old, all who qualify to do work relating to the tent of meeting. The service of the Kohathites relating to the tent of meeting concerns the most holy things." So again, here, earlier we had the descendants of Aaron, they're the priests. Here we have the Kohathites. I would have to assume they are people descended from somebody named Kohath. And they are set up, so the Levites tend generally to the worship life of the people, but the Kohathites are set apart. So the holiest things, they are responsible for that. And there's some specifics there spelled out in the rest of chapter 4 that you are certainly welcome to look into. But again, this idea, a lot of the teaching material has to do with who is responsible for what. So we have the Levites, and then even among them who are set apart as holy, there are others who are chosen or elected for particular responsibility. So we have these Kohathites. And if we jump down to verses 34 through 37, chapter 4, 34 through 37, Moses and Aaron and the leaders of the congregation enrolled the Kohathites by their clans and their ancestral houses, from 30 years old up to 50 years old, everyone who qualified for work relating to the tent of meeting. And the enrollment by clans was 2,750. This was the enrollment of the clans of the Kohathites who served at the tent of meeting, whom Moses and Aaron enrolled according to the commandment of the Lord by Moses. So again, we are counting the numbers. We are taking this census. And I just wanted to jump to that just to give you a sense of, among the Levites, who we had 22,273, we have this group, the Kohathites, and there are 2,750. So it's somewhere in the neighborhood of a little over 10% of the people are set aside. And God says, these are the people who are going to handle the really holy things, the things that are closest in proximity to the tabernacle, closest in proximity to the Ark of the Covenant, things that are used in particularly meaningful parts of worship. So again, part of what I wanted to do here was just to give you an overview, just to say this is the type of teaching and legal material that we come across in the book of Numbers. let me stop there and ask questions, comments, concerns, insights. So if you will indulge me, I would like to conclude our study for tonight at this point. This is how far I got in the morning session, and if I can keep us in the morning and in the evening pretty close to even with each other, it is good for my sanity. So let us go ahead. We will pause from our study. Let me again just throw that out there, not just looking at this teaching material, but anything we've touched on tonight. Questions, things that surprised you, things that you want to know if we're going to be looking at in more detail in the future, things you're just burning to throw out there just because.
I have a question about, it was my understanding that the first generation of Israelites out of Egypt didn't make it to the promised land.
That is correct, yes. So with the exception of Joshua, Caleb, and might have been one or two other people, yeah, that 40-year time period, part of the reason it ended up being 40 years was so that the people who entered the promised land were not the same people who were moaning and groaning in the wilderness. But we're gonna look at that in more detail in some sessions to come. But yes, you are correct in that understanding.
One would think some of the children that had left Egypt, though, would have still been alive after 40 years.
Yes, I would think so. And one of the things that, and this is my opinion, you don't need to take this necessarily as gospel. One of the things that I never really thought about, and I think part of it has to do with the way the stories are told, to me, particularly in the Pentateuch, is that there seems to be kind of a clearer break between the generations, the way the story is told, than I think what we experience in our lives. And something that really made that click for me, there's definitely interaction between generations, but the focus of the story kind of takes place within a generation, and then it moves on and it takes place in that generation. But I'd seen a timeline, and the people who made the timeline said, we are going to start with Adam, and Genesis says how many years Adam lived, and we're going to draw a line. And it says when Adam was this old, he had a son, Seth, and this is how long he lived. And to see how many of those lines overlapped, but to think that, so according to, I'm trying to remember, according to scripture, if we take the lifespans of the people at face value, Terah, Abraham's father, could have met Noah. So the interaction between the generations was perhaps more than what we see from the way the story is told. At least that's my reading of it. So what they're probably looking at is the adults who left in the Exodus, the adults who were out in the wilderness not trusting God, the adults who were saying, you know what, maybe instead of being God's chosen people, we should go back to Egypt. Do you remember the cucumbers? Their cucumbers are the best. So I think the assumption is, I think that, they're talking about the adults who came out in the Exodus. And yeah, if they had little tiny kids with them, 40 years later, a lot of those little tiny kids would be adults. So that is kind of some of my musings on that. Maybe that's the best word for it. Any other thoughts? Well, why don't we go ahead and conclude our time tonight praying the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you,
Well, thank you.
Pastor.
You are very welcome. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and we will see everyone again soon.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night. Take care.